everyone, and welcome to the Edtech podcast. My name is Sophie Bailey, and this week I have been writing about digital leadership, hosting Edtech meetup drinks in London, and launching the edtechpodcast.com, our new website. Go and check it out. Now, on to today's episode. This week we are in takeover mode with Harness, talking about user-centered design and creating EdTech with teachers for teachers. You'll hear about research and design processes to optimise teacher feedback, pedagogical models to keep EdTechs focused on useful product development, and why it's important to make your bed in the morning. First up, here's Nihal Salar, Marketing Director at Harness, to give us the background on what Unio by Harness actually is.
Unio is an interactive lesson delivery and formative assessment tool which was designed both with and for teachers in order to make it easier to manage mixed ability classes. Unio gives teachers a real-time insight into their students' understanding of a lesson and the tools to provide targeted one-to-one support that moves student learning forward. Unio is meant to be used in classrooms where you have one-to-one devices, or as some of our schools who currently use Unio do, in an ICT suite.
Thanks, Nihal. Who else will you hear from in this episode? Teachers Diljit Hardy and Buki Youssef.
I think the first thing that really attracted me to it was the key sort of sentence, shape a new product. So I think so often teachers get given these products, either the school buys them in or somebody's come to show you a particular thing, and they're very much what people who make it want it to be, and it's not really always suited to what we want.
If you've got school members who think, okay, I've got the time to actually try out, say, software, where do they go? And I'm not even sure that I have a clear answer to that right now either. And I think that's part of the issue that we're encountering right now.
Investor Pierre-Antoine Olmo.
So there is a balance between enthusiasm, energy, and also the reality of the classroom. And this is this learning process that I think investors, entrepreneurs, all stakeholders should take together.
And last but not least, Mark Anderson, ICT evangelist and former school senior leader.
In the world of EdTech, nothing comes easy. And so you do need to have that resilience and grit and what have you, but you also need to sweat the small stuff. Thanks,
Mark. This takeover episode is all about engaging teachers in EdTech development. If you're a teacher, ICT coordinator or senior school leader listening in and you'd also like to be involved, you can email Nihal, that's NIHAL.Salah, that's SALAH @uniobyharness.com, or tweet @uniobyharness. And you can also sign up for a free trial to check out what you think before you feedback at www.uniobyharness.com. Have a great week, everyone, and see you back next time for a live recording from London EdTech Week on the topic of how can EdTech drive school improvement. Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we are in takeover mode with Harness, talking about user-centered design and creating EdTech with teachers for teachers. To that end, I'm delighted to be joined by a whole raft of guests on this week's episode. Nihal Salar, Marketing Director with Harness, Pierre-Antoine Olmo, Investor with Harness, Mark Anderson, aka ICT Evangelist, former Assistant Head and award-winning blogger, speaker and EdTech consultant, Buki Youssef, secondary science teacher, consultant and qualified coach, and a member of the Teacher Tech Board with Harness. And finally, Diljit Hardy, chemistry teacher at Lutterworth College, and a member of the Teacher Tech Board again at Harness. So welcome, everyone.
Hello. Hi, Sophie.
So today we'll be looking at everything from how investment and growth plans influence EdTech design to the good and the bad, to how teachers share information on practical EdTech. At a time when the ideas of learner experience and design thinking for education are gaining ever more traction, it's a good stopping point to think about EdTech developed in tandem with teachers too. So let's turn now to the all-important part of this process, which is teachers. Teachers are famously very time poor and very focused on their students. How have Harness worked closely with teachers to develop their service? So I'd like to ask Nihal your thoughts on this question.
So there's a number of ways that we work with teachers to ensure that we are constantly developing Unio in line with the needs of teachers and their students. One way is through the Teacher Tech Board. So this is a board that we've set up that consists of teachers from a range of technical backgrounds. So from the most savvy like Mark Anderson and Bucky Youssef to those who will openly say that they're scared of the technology. We wanted to have a broad representation of teachers. And the board meets several times a year. We discuss best practices in embedding technology in teaching and learning. We also discuss our thoughts on product development with the teachers on the board. And essentially, they give us the sign-off, really. If the teachers don't think it's a worthwhile feature or functionality to add in, it doesn't go into the product. The second way is through our pilot school program. So we run an extensive pilot school program across the UK. And we're actually currently looking to invite more schools to join that program so they get full access to the premium features of Unio. And all we ask for in return is that they give us feedback on the product. The third way is through our internal initiative called the Teacher a Day. And this was actually, it was an interesting story how this came about. We always get emails from teachers who have started using Unio. And they'll send us, the positive feedback and any improvement suggestions as well. And we often invite them into the office and just say, why don't you come round for a cup of coffee and we'll show you our upcoming plans for you, and we'd love to get further feedback. And we thought, well, let's turn this into an initiative that we commit to called A Teacher a Day Keeps the Edtech in Play. So that's our commitment, basically, to make sure that on a daily basis we are speaking to our teacher users wherever they are around the world. And the fourth way is through research. So working with a number of teachers and educational institutions on how to actually measure or look at the impact of using Unio in the classroom. And again, we find it's absolutely fundamental that we work with schools, teachers, senior leaders on this sort of research on an ongoing basis, really. So, and that does tie into the pilot school program. So those are the four key ways.
So Nihal, I spoke about this previously. You talked about using the Agile development process to kind of really refine this. So I was quite interested in the actual mechanics of how you go about your product development and taking some of that feedback and putting it back into what you're developing.
Yeah. So at Harness, we take an Agile approach to our development. So that means that our development process runs in 2-week sprints or cycles. This is important because it allows us to take feedback from teachers on board and make very rapid iterations to the product, and then go back and show those changes in the product to the teachers and get further feedback on it. So that's our formal development process. But informally, there are a number of other things that we do. We're always in contact with teachers. And for example, with Mark Anderson, when we first met, I reached out to him and asked if he would have a look at Unio and give us some feedback. And during our first call, it was not what I was typically used to in terms of, a consultancy session with a client, but rather Mark took the time to teach me. And he pulled up Unio on the Skype call and used the whiteboard on Unio to explain the TPAC and summer models to me. And that was the beginning of building a really solid relationship with Mark, who's until today continued to be incredibly supportive and helpful, and who I would consider a friend as well. So I think it's a combination of that formal Agile development process, but also building very strong and solid relationships with the teachers that we work with.
So we're very privileged in these times of the summer holidays to welcome some teachers. So I'd like to move to those teachers now. First up, welcome Diljit.
Hi, thank you.
Hello. So my understanding is you were used as one of the pilot schools, so the college where you work, working with Unio in this process of user-led design. So I just wondered if you could talk to us about how you came to work with Harness on Unio and what that's meant for the practical outcome of how you use that in the classroom as well.
Yeah, I think the first thing that really attracted me to it was the key sort of sentence, shape a new product. So I think so often teachers get given these products, either the school buys them in or somebody's come to show you a particular thing, and they're very much what people who make it want it to be. And it's not really always suited to what we want. So having this ability to shape a new product, that's what really got me interested. because I thought it'd be great to actually try out things and think, actually, this doesn't work. And actually being able to get back to them and say, well, actually, could you change this? Or could we actually take this a little bit further? And that's why I really got involved. Getting it on board at school, that was a different matter, because their key issues were, we don't want it on our system, we don't want it to do this, that and the other. So actually the fact that it was web-based meant that I could actually go ahead and try it.
That's very interesting. And so you almost became like a sort of hub in the middle, so communicating with the Harness team, communicating internally within the school. How did you find that process as well?
I think once we sort of got everything going, it was quite good, because once school agreed that, yes, it was okay to test, Unio came in, they showed me how to use the product. And, with other companies, we've been there before, really, at that point. So I then went away and developed my first sort of lesson. And I think for me, the key thing there was I didn't have to come up with a new lesson, because if I'd have had to do that, I don't think I would have done it. I've been teaching for over 25 years, so I have a real bank of lessons that I want to use, and I know what works, what doesn't. So I don't want to start from scratch.
And so when you used your lessons, but in the new model, so with the students being able to see them on their own devices and so on, what were the parts of the experience that you thought were really practical and, had a really positive outcome in the lessons as well? What did you feed back on that side?
I think the assessment for learning was brilliant, because immediately I got instant feedback of where my students were, what they were doing. Because in the past, when you're doing that, you kind of get class feedback, so you kind of know where your class is, but that's about as far as you can usually take that. But this was brilliant, because each student had their own screen, which they really liked, and they were able to give their feedback, and they really loved that. But also from my point of view, immediately I could see who was struggling with what. And what we want to know is where our individual students are. And we were able to do that by using this.
And so how long was the pilot project as well?
Oh, I've been working on it for quite a while. I think probably about January.
So that's ongoing as we speak?
Yeah.
And what were some of the areas where you said, actually, could you develop this? And you fed back and saw that process work through into the next iteration of the product?
I think one of the first things was that the students weren't able to keep a copy of their annotated screens. And so what we were doing at that time was either taking a screenshot, or I was producing sort of like a summary sheet where they kind of wrote a summary of what they'd learnt. And what we really wanted was for them to be able to go back and actually see that, keep their PowerPoints, and be able to come back to them. And that was great, because once they've developed that, it's just a whole lot more meaningful for us and the students, because they've got that work then forever.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Moving to Bookie as well. So one question I had was, there are so many companies out there, and I know that, for example, whether it's Diljit or yourself or Mark, you're sort of probably constantly getting asked to review and pilot different products, or, get on board or join advisory boards and that kind of thing. So I just wondered what it was about working with Harness, how you came to be involved, and what prompted you to get involved in a more extensive way.
Okay, well, I came on board towards the end of the academic year, so I was in a time and place which actually could be involved more extensively than I would normally be. I think there are a number of key things. And the first thing that actually struck me was the fact that this was a company that really was not just interested about the software, but they just wanted to make a resource that would aid the teaching and learning, and teachers are the focus of what they're actually trying to produce. And this is in direct contrast to some organisations I've actually been involved with, where you can see, as Diljit said, their main concern is the product, the utilisation of it and selling it, whether it fits your educational needs or not. By Harness are complete opposite this, and it's a strange thing to say, but having met the team, they are a team that have actually got heart. They are passionate and truly believe in what they're actually trying to do. And that comes across in the feedback that you receive, and actually, being open and honest about making sure that the product actually works in the best way. And another reason I got involved was the fact that this is a real opportunity to support and take flipped learning to the next level, where you can enable students to work more independently than they normally would, and actually have personalise in-lesson feedback to actually move their learning and therefore progress on.
I'd also be interested to know from your perspective, having worked with lots of different EdTech companies, sort of how many take on positive or negative feedback from educators. And then also, how can we improve this dialogue? So the whole mission behind the EdTech podcast is to get people talking more across the service provider side and then the educators. So I just wondered, because if you've put your blood, sweat and tears into something, and then actually when you take it to people, they say, oh, it's not quite right, it's very easy to just kind of tune that out. So what's your kind of experience on that, and how do you think we can generally improve it as well?
Okay, well, more recently, what I'm finding is that EdTech companies, because they want to engage with schools and they are, I suppose, more determined to find something that fits for them, they are more open to actually listening to feedback, whether it's positive or negative. And they actually invite educators to try and actually share ideas of things that the companies could actually develop. I think the most difficult aspect is actually how to establish the dialogue. It's only because of the fact that I've been involved with organisations, say like Innovate My School or BISA, and having the networks that are actually involved with EdTech, that I've actually got to hear of a few opportunities out there. But what you really, I suppose, ideally would need is a forum. Say, for example, if you have BETS, where you don't just have EdTech companies that just come to showcase what they do, but say like have a forum in which you could actually have EdTech companies or members of the EdTech companies, as well as educators, who can actually sit down and talk about some of the issues that both are trying to address. So in terms of educators, maybe some of the issues that they're actually encountering, actually having the first-hand face-to-face conversation with company representatives, that they could actually have a dialogue about what they could both do to actually move forward. And then it's I suppose, establish a more formal forum where the discussions can actually take place, and actually just have a go-to place where if educators think, okay, I want to get involved, they know where to go. Because right now, I think it's very difficult that if you've got school members who think, okay, I've got the time to actually try out, say, software, where do they go? And I'm not even sure that I have a clear answer to that right now either. And I think that's part of the issue that we're encountering right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because that's what I was going to ask, was whether you had any recommendations for teachers to sort of extend their networks to become more immersed in some of these developmental processes. But it sounds like you think there's still loads of opportunity to kind of build that up as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is, for example, you could use particular social media platforms, say like LinkedIn. Educators, for example, could actually maybe have as part of their LinkedIn profile an expression of interest of wanting to engage with EdTech companies and making it clear about how they'd like to engage, so that at least it raises awareness about the fact that they are interested in actually coming on board. And maybe EdTech companies could do the same as well. If they share on particular platforms, social media platforms, that these are the opportunities for educators to come on board and how they could actually engage. I think that might at least, first of all, raise awareness, but at least start the conversations and get the ball rolling in that regard.
Just finally, my understanding is you're working with Unio on a research project to assess impact in the classroom. So could you tell us a little bit about that and what the main aims are and how you're going about that as well?
Okay, so this is just an initial research focus. But for me, what are the common issues that teachers talk about? And as I've mentioned time and time again, say things like effective differentiation or marking and feedback, and actually thinking about how we could utilize the software to enhance this. So in the first instance, what we're actually looking at is using the tools on the software, looking just generally how teachers could use it to mark and provide feedback in lesson in real time, and getting some feedback about what works and what needs to be changed. And I think once we've got the initial feedback there, I know it sounds very general right now, is actually then drilling down to specific ways back to, like, could there be tools that we could develop and utilize that could support verbal feedback, so that the students can actually receive feedback from teachers in a lesson, act upon it. So by the end of a lesson, you can actually see a note the progress has actually been made.
It always comes up. I know it came up in our discussion before that marking, anything to remove the dreaded marking and the amount of time that's necessary on it would be amazing. Thank you very much, Bookie. Let's move on to Mark. Mark, hello.
Hi, Sophie.
You've been formally involved in school leadership and know how many calls, again, school leaders get daily from EdTech companies on the new best thing. So do you have any advice for people listening in on, how that approach from EdTech companies to teachers or school leaders could be improved?
Well, something that I've noticed with working with Unio is their desire to try and develop themselves and develop their team and learn more about what makes effective learning with technology. I first sort of came across Nihal back in 2016 when she came to a session I was running at the Festival of Education at Wellington. And the team are just really, really keen to understand teaching and learning and what the sort of good aspects of teaching and learning are and how that can then inform what they do with the product. So they've been trying to develop something that's easy to use, easy to access. It solves a problem. As you mentioned, it helps with marking and is striving to shorten the gap between when students react to learning content in the classroom and how quickly teachers can feed back on that. And taking the time to do that groundwork up front before getting to a point where they're trying to sell to school at scale is really important. And everyone I've been involved with and spoken to, both on the teacher front, like Bucky and what have you, through to Nihal, everyone's really focused on trying to make things better. But doing that groundwork up front to make sure they create a product which is going to be effective and hit those right buttons, being led by teaching and learning, is a great model, I think, that other companies could learn from.
And on the pedagogical side of it, or the teaching and learning that you mentioned, are there any particular approaches that you have been discussing with Nihal in terms of how that might make a more solid foundation for what they're doing?
Yeah, so there are a few models that I share and have written about, and they're pretty well established now with the SAMA model and TPAC as well. But I was saying to the team around SAMA, teachers, you mentioned earlier, Sophie, you'll have your early adopters and what have you, people who will get on board and what have you. But how do you make it so that a consistent approach to technology can be sort of deployed across a whole school? Because when it comes to getting technology working well at scale, you need to think about your sort of lowest common denominators, the people who aren't going to be so readily happy to take on board some new technology. Teachers will ask themselves, what's in it for me? How is this going to make my job better? How is it going to make my job easier? How is it going to improve the standards in my classroom? How is it going to improve the retention rates of my students? So forth and so on. And so when you start thinking about the SAMA model, that means that you can then start thinking about developing a product so that it does things that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the technology. And that's what you get with Unio, the ability to interact in real time, see in real time the responses from students, and things, like I say, around marking, which helps inform those next steps, so you can give that feedback quickly. And those are all things that are sort of backed up by some research by the likes of John Hattie and what have you, and the discussions that Dylan William talks about around bringing feedback to students as quickly as possible. You'll remember yourself, there would have been teachers when you were at school, Sophie, who would have marked your books quickly, and there'll be teachers who took a week, let's say. And if it was taking your teachers a week or so, plus even longer, to mark your books, how invested were you still in that work that you did a week, 2 weeks on as a student? You won't have been. And so using modern methods and shortening that gap and getting that feedback to the students on the work that they're doing, the learning that's taking place as quickly as possible, using strategies and techniques that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the technology, are ways in which you can bring on board all those teachers so you get a consistent experience across the whole of your school, which is only great for the kids, which is what you want.
So you mentioned the importance of having an investor that understands this development process and sort of has that pedagogical understanding as well. So it's a great point to turn to Pierre-Antoine. So hello, Pierre.
Hello, Sophie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So from an investor's point of view, I've been in a lot of Edtech sector meetings recently with various stakeholders and government discussing the lack of patient capital in Edtech. And it just got me thinking, so Nihal mentioned that part of the development and making something that's actually practical and useful is being able to say, do you know what, this isn't quite working. And although we've put a lot of time into this, we should develop it in this way and actually develop something really useful. And it got me thinking from an investor point of view, there must be quite a lot of pressure that's sort of burning money and it's, extra time and delaying the sort of investor hoped for outcome, I suppose. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that and your wider thoughts on how investors can support Edtech to be meaningful and impactful in the long run as well.
The first one regarding the patient capital, I think we need to think also of investment in education as a learning process. it's very recent that we can even think of investing in education. Education has for a long time been considered as a public good. It still is. But as a public good, it was almost closed to any private investors except higher education or except not formal education. So education per se, for a long time, was not open to investors. And investors were dragged in by inspired entrepreneurs. And so they need to learn what education is about. And sometimes the entrepreneur themselves are not patient enough to teach them and are not patient enough to understand what education is about in global. And I think that when we are talking of the Edtech movement, sometimes we just forget that Ed means education. And I like more the word education startup than Edtech startups. I still believe that technology is part of the game, but has always been. But the main objective is to change and to transform education. So you're right. It takes time. Sometimes the ministers, the government discussion that you go to, they have also a peculiar way of thinking of time. I mean, for them, changing is not a matter of days or years. It's more a matter of decades. And I am not sure that we have this amount of time. So we are all in a hurry to change. The only thing is that investors, entrepreneurs, teachers, families, they all need to agree on a process to change. And it's not your urgency that makes the change happen, but it's also not your inertia that will make the change happen. So there is a balance between enthusiasm, energy, and also the reality of the classroom. And this is this learning process that I think investors, entrepreneurs, all stakeholders should take together. And this is what I think we are intending to do with Harness.
Yeah, I noticed in reading around some of your work and your wider work in open learning and MOOCs that you have a very collaborative approach to education development. And so I can sort of see the influence that must have had on your approach to investing. One of my questions looking at investing in EdTech more broadly is to what extent investors have been responsible for distorting the EdTech available to teachers and whether that's fair or unfair. So, for example, when there's a model that works quite well, so for example, some of the learning management systems that are out there, there's quite a trend towards investing in similar products and perhaps creating a homogenized landscape of products that are available. So I just wondered if you see that as well, or if you see that there's an alternative way to thinking about investing and creating a diversity of offerings out there for teachers as well.
Okay, first of all, I think the first thing investors have been responsible for, they have been responsible for creating the EdTech movement. Not alone, but instead of distorting it, they have made it possible in a way. It's true also that distortion means at some point whether you are clever enough to identify the right spots and the right needs and the right challenges. And this is, again, a joint effort and a joint design effort of all along the value chain. What I think is that it's not because you have an LMS that works that you are not allowed to invest in more LMS. I mean, just like when you have a textbook, you are also allowed to invest in more textbooks if you believe that you can make it better. The key thing is, do you have a sound analysis of the needs? Do you have a clear understanding of the challenges? Unio, for instance, started as a pseudo LMS, and then we realized that it was not useful to just be positioned as an LMS. We just needed to be more agnostic in this point of view and focus on other issues. So I guess that distortion comes when you just stop looking around. So investors, they may have a distortion effect when they claim their money back too quickly. This is, I refer to your former question about patient capital. But I personally also learned something from investors. I am not a professional investor to start with. As you just gently reminded, I am a professional of education. I have my own company. I invest in my projects. I believe in participatory education. I believe in education as a dialogue. But I also understand that investment is a matter of professionals. And I brought in professionals in this game. I brought my brother, among others, who is a personal investor. He told me once, the problem is not when I will get my money back. The problem is if I will get my money back. So it's not so much a matter of time. We all agree about it will take time. It's a matter of having the right approach, having the right method, and being patient enough not to get the money back soon, but to listen to all the actors and be able to respond to their needs. And this is really what I think needs to be taught. And this is also why I think that the success stories in the EdTech field, in the innovation in education field, they all come through a very good mix of visionary entrepreneur and investors willing to learn. And I think that the best expression of patience is, are you willing to learn and take the time to learn? And this is, I guess, one of the key to success.
Thank you very much, Pierre-Antoine. There's two things I was thinking about in researching around this podcast. One was, when you think about the sort of successful EdTech companies out there, there's two that spring to mind. And their commonality is that they are very, very in touch with teachers, whether that's through the way they get their marketing research back or sort of actually going out to schools. And that just really struck me that it's definitely a success factor there. And the other one that I wanted to know about, whether there was any development plans in this way, is that I think, EdTech has probably matured from tech for tech's sake to being more teacher focused. And obviously there's a long way for lots of companies to go on that, but I think we are getting there. To then, I think, thinking about becoming more sort of learner experience focused. And I wondered whether there was any plans to sort of replicate what you're doing with learners and or parents and other stakeholders.
Yes, so we strongly believe that the starting point needs to be the teacher, because the teacher is the gateway to the classroom and the centre of the classroom. We currently do involve students through the pilot programme. So when we go into our pilot schools, we will not only ask for teacher feedback, but part of the process, we sit and we observe. And that's not just me and our CEO going into these lessons. We actually have our developers come in as well, so that they can see, how students are using the software, where they're tripping up. And at the end, we'll either do surveys and brief interviews as well. And it's really interesting. One of the pilot schools that we went to, at the end of the lesson, I asked a question. I said, how did you using Unio make you feel during the lesson? And I purposely used the word feel rather than what did you think about Unio? And a few of the students started responding with answers like, I felt special. And I thought, why did you feel special? And he said, well, because I had more attention from my teacher. I felt like we were on the same page. And that was incredible feedback for us, because it just opened our eyes to a whole other aspect of, what's the emotional impact of using technology on the teacher and the student. So students are already part of of that development process. We get feedback from them through the pilot schools. And moving forward, we would like to involve them more and more. And we'll probably come up with mechanisms similar to what we do with the Teacher Tech Board, but that's appropriate for students. The other point I'll make is that we absolutely will be also looking at engaging with parents and even school governors and other stakeholders through the research that we're carrying out. Because, as you touched on earlier, there are a number of key stakeholders and you have to consider them all in your development process. What weight you give to each of the feedback is another matter altogether. So absolutely, I think involving teachers, involving students, involving parents and governors, but making sure that we always stay true to, the point I made earlier on is that we're developing this product to make the lives of teachers easier, to support them in doing their job, make it less stressful for them, and that there will always be the priority in that process, I think, for us. Otherwise, it's very easy to get distracted and defocused. So I think maintaining that focus is absolutely key, and just being really clear on where the priorities are.
Something else, just adding on to what Nihal said there, something that's really important for schools is that any products they choose to use actually work. As you'll know, like EdTech efficacy is a big topic, and the work that Nihal and the team are doing with teachers and trying to undertake some research and move their understanding about the product forward and what have you, only serves to make their products more effective in terms of its impact and usefulness for schools. I think there's quite a lot that other companies could sort of take on board from their approach, whether it's something that Harness would like to use with other products in the future, or whether other companies could sort of take on board their approach as a means to developing what they do. Either way, making sure that any EdTech that you develop actually does work and solves problems in education and helps teachers and makes them more efficient and what have you, can only be a good thing.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our discussion on user-centered design and co-creating a best-of-breed edtech with teachers for teachers. We've heard today on best practice design and research feedback loops, being a humble entrepreneur and involving educators' positive and negative comments into your design, making sure investors understand the concept of patient capital and your long-term vision, offering multiple ways for educators to be involved with your developing service in meaningful and practical ways. I'd like to spend the last few minutes of today's episode just asking today's guests what their key takeaway books, resources, or Twitter handle shares would be on this topic. So mine to kick off would be, it's probably twice as long as it needs to be, but the Lean Startup by Eric Ries has a few of these discussion points in it. And there's also a really great learner experience meetup group out there, which is based in London, but perhaps you could replicate wherever you're listening in if you're not based here. So who'd like to kick off with a few other suggestions just to kind of wrap up today's discussion?
They're actually blogs. Like I said, I find it quite difficult to actually find some resources to share in this regard, but I came across two blogs which I thought were really key. And the first one is by Ainsley Harris, and it's called The Secrets to Building Great EdTech Products. And it was produced in 2015. But what's really interesting is the fact that the issues and experiences shared within that blog are still relevant today. And I think it's just something that EdTech companies should actually really just be mindful of, some of the pitfalls maybe to avoid. And the second blog is by Wheezy Yancey Segal. I hope I pronounced her name correctly. And it's called How Teachers Can Change the Future of Educational Technology. And it outlines ways in which educators can actually get involved with what edtech companies are trying to produce and give suggestions. So, for example, maybe they could actually get involved with advisory positions of educational tech companies, maybe collaborate with or hire developers so they can actually create and build educational tools that they know would suit the needs of their school and maybe other schools as well, etc. So I think those two blogs are a great starting point, and also a great reference point for edtech companies, because they can see what do they do that mirrors what the advice is actually given, and what are the next steps they should actually undertake.
Yeah, I definitely want to check out that second one. That sounds great. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can make a few suggestions. So I was going to suggest the Lean Startup. You already mentioned that. The other one that I think is a really good one to read is If You Build It, Will They Come? 3 Steps to Test and Validate Any Market Opportunity. And again, that's very much about taking an agile approach to product development. Don't spend lots of money and time building something, assuming that your target audience will decide to use it. And then the other 2 resources that I would suggest, anyone who's one of the key things that we often talk about, educating the teachers on the tech, but I don't think we focus enough on educating the edtechers on the education. So when Mark, educated me on the work of John Hassey and Dylan William, it opened a whole world of possibilities and opportunities. So I would suggest anyone who's not necessarily from an education background is follow their work and educate yourself on those, definitely.
Perfect. And did you have a few ways that people, teachers listening in, can also get involved with your product development as well?
Absolutely. I mean, we are, like I said, inviting more schools to take part in our pilot school program. So if anyone is interested in joining the pilot school program, it means they would have access to all of the premium features of Unio. We would go in and do training for all the staff who will be using it, and all we ask for in return is feedback and to attend a couple of lessons and observe how Unio is being used, obviously at a time that's convenient for the school. And schools can contact us by emailing us, so that would be info@uniobyharness.com, or they can reach out to us on Twitter, and our Twitter handle is uniobyharness. And we're always open to receiving feedback from any of our users. So our website's contact page has all of our contact information. We love to receive phone calls from teachers or emails, Twitter. Just get in touch, please. We'd love to hear from you.
And Mark, have you got any points you'd like to throw out there as well?
Yeah, so I'd echo the ideas that both Nihal and Bucky have said, but a book I read recently by a guy called Admiral William H. McRaven called Make Your Bed. He's an ex-Navy SEAL. He was I forget his actual title at the time, but he's the guy who oversaw the mission which saw Osama bin Laden being taken out and what have you. He's had some really amazing life experiences. But in his book, Make Your Bed, he talks about sweating the small stuff, And if you can't get up in the morning and do a simple thing like making your bed, then how can you expect to be able to do the hard stuff? And there's loads of stuff in there which sort of resonates with Carol Dweck's work around resilience and grit and growth mindset and what have you. But it's a really, really, really interesting read. And certainly, in the world of EdTech, nothing comes easy. And so you do need to have that resilience and grit and what have you, but you also need to sweat the small stuff and know that you will come across loads of things that will test you and make you want to run away and think carefully about whether you should have started it in the first place and so forth and so on. But the book's really, really helpful. And so that would be my book recommendation. And as for anyone looking to find out more about EdTech, I would hope if they listen to this podcast, then they'll be aware of things like hashtag EdTech and hashtag e-learning and things like the EdTech chat on Twitter and EdTech After Dark and so forth and so on. But if you haven't and you're interested, then get yourself onto Twitter and check out some of those hashtags. There's so much that you can learn about and what have you. I didn't want to sort of do a big shout out from my website, but there's plenty of thoughts and ideas around EdTech on ictevangelist.com. If anybody wanted to check that out as well. I'll reinforce what Nihal said as well. If you want to get involved, please do get in touch because they are so up for feedback and listening to teachers and helping out drive their product forwards.
Well, obviously you have your website. That's an absolute given. And Bookie, do you do some blogging as well?
I do, yes. I mean, I've recently set up my own WordPress blog, but I blog on Staff Room about a wide variety of things, including EdTech, and also for a variety of companies on a bespoke basis.
Look, as I don't want to be obnoxious, and so I won't refer to my blog where I write quite a lot about EdTech and the perspective of investors and how we take teachers into account, but I certainly do have a blog on this, paulmo.com, so I can write it to you. But there is another set of resources that I'd like to share, and this set of resources is based on learning design approach. And we design a learning design kit with an Israeli education specialist named Yishai Moore. And Yishai played a very important role in the development of Unio. And jointly with Yishai, we designed an approach that helped entrepreneurs, but that helped also teachers and any innovators in education to challenge themselves, to challenge their ideas, and to try to design, if not the right solution, at least a solution that responds to a number of criteria that could make it work in the classroom in the mid and long run.
Yeah, so that's moocsandco, all one word, .com/n/kit. So moocsandco.com.
Yeah, this is exactly it. So I guess we need more design in learning, and I guess that this is also what we have been talking about this morning.
Perfect. So what I'll do is I'll share all of those links in the show notes, and love to hear your feedback, everyone who's listening in, on the ideas shared by today's guests. So you can either feedback directly, the edtechpodcast@gmail.com. We already had the Unio email, but I'll also list that out in the show notes. And there's also Twitter @podcastedtech and @Unio by Harness. So thank you very much to all of today's guests, and we look forward to further discussion on this topic of user-centered design. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care, Sophie.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks for listening in, everyone. Don't forget you can be involved in the development process with the team at Harness by emailing nihal.salah@uniobyharness.com or tweeting them @uniobyharness. You can also send in your feedback by recording a quick call-in via the voicemail service on the website at www.theedtechpodcast.com or via the EdTech Podcast on the app Anchor. See you soon.